Welcome back to Hip Hop Production Techniques. In this episode I'm going to show you how to create a drum pattern using the Kong Drum Designer in Reason so that we can put a drum track to the sample. So first go to Create and click Kong Drum Designer. For this tutorial I've got the MPD connected to my computer with a USB cable, so I'll be able to play the drums using the MPD, similar to the way I used it in the last tutorial when I was triggering the samples. So first notice that the Kong device has 16 pads, each containing a different drum sample. So if you are using a controller like the MPD, it will be very useful because the samples that are mapped out across the 16 pads will correspond to the 16 pads on your MPD controller. So for example, if I hit pad 1, that's playing the kick drum on pad 1 of the Kong device. So let me show you a few basic features of Kong. Up here is where we can browse a patch. So if I click that button, go into Kong Kits, there are various folders categorized in genres and different sounds. So if I go to a hip hop kit, scroll across these, okay, and I can select one of those kits if I choose. But then down here you can browse individual drum patches. So first you click on the pad that you want to browse and then click the browse button and go through the different drum samples. Then underneath you have certain controls, the pitch, decay, the level, tone, pan. I'll get back to these send controls. Then here where it says show drum and FX, I'm going to click this button and an extra box will drop underneath Kong, and this is where we can see the drum module and the effects that we can assign to each drum. So notice where it says drum module. At the moment it has physical bass drum selected, and in this mode you're able to control these parameters similar to what I showed you in the top half of Kong. We can change the tone, the level and various other controls which are pretty much self-explanatory, so you can experiment with those. But then as well as the physical modules, there are synth modules, so you can create a synth based drum which has similar controls. Or another interesting module is the Nurse Rex loop player, and this has a very similar function to the Dr. Octarex that you saw me use in the last tutorial, where you are able to load Rex files here and then map the slices across the 16 pads. But the drum module I'm going to be using is the Nano Sampler. This is where I can browse my own drum samples and load them into Kong. I can do that either here or here, but I'm going to do it here. So what I'm going to do is browse each of my drum samples and then we'll continue. So first I'm going to load in a kick into pad 1. Then in the snare I'm going to load snare. I've already prepared these drums, that's why I have them in a designated folder. So that's the snare. Now to load a hi-hat. And an open hi-hat. And this open hi-hat I actually chopped out of the Al Green song. Okay, and before we go any further, I'm just going to apply something to the Kong device, which is something I always use on my drums in Reason. First I'm going to create a combinator. combinator basically enables you to create a patch sound for the device you're working with. So within this box here, I can create various devices, equalizers, compressors, etc., and they'll all be combined into one patch and can be turned on and off at the bypass switch. But the first thing I usually start with is the Scream 4 distortion device. It's just a really good way to beef up your drums and make it sound a lot thicker. So if I there are lots of different types of distortion in Scream, but I usually go with tape because it doesn't change the sound too much or make it too distorted like some of the other options can. It just basically makes it a bit louder and a bit thicker without taking away the sound that you want. Here in the cut section is just a basic EQ. I usually leave it like that really, just a slight boost at the high end, slight boost at the low end. So if you'll notice, if I make the connections first, so what I have to do is take the output from Kong, which is here, and put that into the combinator input, take the combinator output, and I'm going to split that across two channels the same way I did with the Octarex, and pan them to spread the stereo image. And then here there are inputs and outputs on the combinator that go to and from the devices that it contains. So now that that's connected, you should be able to hear the difference. So first I'll bypass it. Now I'll turn it on. See, that's a lot louder now. So now I'm just going to record some drum patterns over the different parts of the sample. As you can see, I've colour coded areas of the sample now and laid out the structure. So in the first 4 bars we've got the intro, then we've got the main verse, in red, then in yellow, chorus, orange is the alternate verse, and blue is the break part. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the previous tutorial when using the MPD is there is a button at the top which says full level, and in situations like this you may want to have that switched on, so no matter how hard or soft you hit the pads, each note will be at full velocity. So here you can see that the box is selected, which contains the MIDI notes that I've just recorded. So if I just press enter, then we can see the notes that have been recorded. And if I press Command A to select them all, and then Command K to quantize them, hopefully that should be in time now. Okay, now I want to go back to Kong for a moment and go to pad 5 so I can load another kick sample, because I want to layer the first bass drum, which has quite a low tone, with a kick that's got a bit more top end. So I'm going to go back into the editor now and just select the bass drum hits that I recorded and hold Option and drag these notes up to where it says bass drum 2, and now they'll be layered together. Okay. So now to record a drum pattern for the verse. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set a loop point of 8 bars, so that when it plays through the first loop, I can just play the kick and snare part, and then when it loops, I can add the hi-hats on top. And this is a really useful way to record your drums if you're not very good at playing more than 1 or 2 pads at a time. Okay, so I'll enter that and select all of the notes again and quantize to make sure. Okay, now I'm going to do what I did before and copy these drum notes to layer the kick, and then copy that across so that that 8-bar drum pattern lasts for 16 bars. So I can do that either by holding Option and dragging, or I can have it selected, then type Command C to copy and Command V to paste next to it. But as there's a slightly different arrangement of the sample at the end of the verse, I want to make a slight adjustment to the end of the drum pattern here, and just remove these last few notes so that it sounds like this. Okay then, so now to do the chorus part, and again I'm going to loop it so that I can play the hi-hats after the kick and snare. I'll just mention that to set a loop you need to set the left and right loop locators and have the loop button ticked. You can do that either by clicking on it with the mouse or pressing the L key on the keyboard.
Talking, talking. Talking, talking. Talking, talking. Talking, talking.
And again, to quantize the notes, just check that's okay.
Talking, talking.
And to again copy the bass drum, I can also copy this drum pattern of the verse over to the second verse as well as the chorus part. I can copy that to all of the yellow parts of the sample, as I know that those are the chorus parts. So now to play drum pattern for the alternate verse. This time I'm going to create a box first so that I can enter it and you can see the MIDI notes appear as I record them. OK, and again quantize and copy that over to the second 8 bars of the verse, like so. And now the final section to put a drum pattern over is the break. But I must remember to copy the bass drum. And there we have our drum track. So let's just have a quick listen and I'll roughly adjust some of the drum levels.
Oh, baby. Talking.
So that's sounding pretty good already without any mixing, and that's one of the qualities about hip hop. You can have something made from basic materials, and the simpler it is, the less mixing is involved. But as you'll see in some of the upcoming tutorials, there's going to be a lot more involved in this project, which is when we'll get more in depth about the mixing processes. So before I finish the video, I'm just going to briefly explain something I haven't talked about yet, which is the effects in Kong. You have 2 effects per drum pad, where you can click on the arrow here and add a compressor, a filter, an EQ, etc. And here is the bus FX, where you can add another one, and here you control the amount of the sample that you send to the bus with the bus FX send, and then there's also a master FX, and here you can control the amount you send from the bus FX to the master FX.